Welcome to the Understanding Boys podcast. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their leaders past, present and emerging. The Understanding Boys podcast is a series of conversations exploring what it is to be a good man these days. And if you had a story that you could tell a boy of, say, 14 and he'd listen, what would that story be? And that's really what I'm asking our guests today. I'm Dr Swann, and we're a community of teachers and parents concerned with the education and growth of boys and young men in the modern world. This series is brought to you by Brighton Grammar, an all-boys school in Melbourne. To learn more about the podcast, please visit understandingboys.com.au. In our podcast today, we speak with Daniel Petre. Daniel's the author of a book, Father Time, which is really an Australian classic. It's about being a dad. And in our podcast today, we share stories about being present and mindful as parents. We also talk a little bit about his work. Someone who's had great success as an independent entrepreneur, but also in his philanthropic work. He and his wife, Carolyn, founded the Petre Foundation, given an enormous amount of time, energy and funds to emerging Australian charities. Really hope you enjoy the conversation today. And so it's a great pleasure. We welcome Daniel Petre to the podcast. Thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us. Welcome to the Understanding Boys podcast.
Thanks, Ray. Good to be here.
So for some of us, we're going to be talking a lot about fathering. We're going to talk a bit about your book, Father Time, and a little bit about your work and some of the fantastic advice that you've got in the book, and just unpack that a little bit for our listeners. I guess I also just want to start with a little bit of a caveat, for some of us, and I know you're very familiar with Steve Biddulph's work as well, that, for some of us in our relationships with our dads haven't always been good, and so in listening to this, people might be thinking, a podcast on fathering, oh, great, maybe I'll skip this episode. But of course, it's much more than that. Fathers play a really important role. And as dads, we need to think about it because, some of us have all sorts of different kinds of relationships with our own dads, if we had them in our lives at all.
Yeah, look, I think you need to try and separate the two from what your experience was to what your responsibility is. And I think it's that difference of view. When I was doing my failed PhD, one of the things I came across was some research about the impact of your relationship with your father in terms of how it impacted you. And what it found, which was, I guess, kind of unfortunate, was that there's a very small proportion of people who had a terrible relationship with their dad, and they're consciously going to make a better one with their kids. It's going to be a better relationship. We can talk about better later, but they're conscious of the negative experience they had, and they want to make it a positive one for their kids. A very small group had a very positive experience, and they are going to work hard to recreate that same level of positivity. But more like 90% of men sit in the middle, which is they don't consciously reflect on their experiences, how it's impacting their role as a father. And yet clearly your experiences in your past do impact the way you move forward in any relationship or any life experience. And so I think the difficulty is that for most, probably there are things that could have been better in our relationship with our dad. And if we're not conscious of what it means to be a good dad, then we're probably not going to really end up being one in the sense of having applied thoughtful effort to it. And it is by far and away the most important thing you'll do as a man is to be a good father. But by far and away, more than anything else you'll do, being a good father is key. Yeah,
and it's, just in listening to you talk, how you're actually explaining, to actually have an intent, like actually really think about it, do some planning around it and prepare or reflect. As I know we'll talk a bit about when we get into your book, a big part of your work with dads is actually about getting them to find time and space to actually be able to reflect on, the impact that they're having on others. I love the game that you suggested in your book, which I'm a little bit nervous to play with my kids actually, where you ask the kids to play the role of the dad.
Yes.
and then you'll see that.
If you want to put a mirror up, try that. But look, I think and this is a difficult one often with many dads that I talk to, is when you have a child, you have a responsibility to try to bring up that child to be the best human being they can be. not necessarily the smartest or the hardest working but the best human in all its sort of constructs. It requires thoughtful application and intent, and in the knowledge you're going to make mistakes. But I guess in anything that I've done in life is if you're thoughtful and present about something, chances are you won't be a complete screw up, and chances are you'll also know when you've made a mistake and be able to rectify the mistake. It's the sort of blind, hey, I got this, bashing my child on a Friday afternoon is a really good thing, kind of mindless application. And it's just not right, because not only do you damage a relationship that could be one of great joy for you, but you set up the difficulty for that child to then go on in society.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating, isn't it? A lot of the parents that I work with, you're surprised actually that, oh, wow, there's someone else has actually experienced this. It's like that level of naivety is like, wow, you sort of think sometimes, and I'm guilty of it as much as anybody. You think you're the first person who's ever had to tell your kid that they can't go out, or, that there's something that's really, really important, like a value. Like sometimes that comes up, I know in my own parenting, with one of my kids is like, oh, that just doesn't feel right. But I haven't actually really stopped and thought about it enough and reflected and actually maybe planned a better conversation, separating my child from the behavior and really going back to the value and why is that important and how do I do that? So, really creating some time, as for the role that I'm playing as a dad. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think you can't be perfect. I think to suggest that anyone's going to be this, perfect movie example of a father is ridiculous. And I think you don't need to. If there's M. Scott Peck wrote this great book, The Road Less Traveled, and in there he talks about a few things you need to learn as a child about seeking out the truth, always seeking out the truth, taking responsibility for your actions, and seeking a balanced life. And I think the combination of taking responsibility for your actions quickly dissipates long-term negativity. So if you have, you're tired, you've come home and you've said something to your child that you reflect and that really wasn't nice, then just say sorry. And it sounds ridiculously simple, but it is incredibly powerful for an adult to say to an 8-year-old, look, I'm really sorry. I was tired, I was distracted, I didn't mean to say that wasn't fair or that wasn't right. I think it is that honesty and there's more value in that exchange than trying to pretend you're perfect at all the time, because the child then sees you're human. It's okay to be human. It's okay to make mistakes, but gee, it's important to take responsibility for your mistakes and own them. And the other thing that he also talks about in the book, which is now 30 or 40 years old, but a marvelous book, is that the greatest gift you can give a child is this sense of non-judgmental love. Now, that doesn't mean you like everything they do. You may dislike some of their behaviors, you may dislike some of their choices, but that they know that in your love for them, there is a safe place for them. And I know from personal experience, not feeling that and how vulnerable it makes you feel in the world. And the one thing, at least we've tried, and time will tell with our kids, that we've tried to give them is a sense that they are judged. They're not judged. They're not judged. It's unjudged love. It's love of them as a person that will always be there through thick and thin, that there is always a safe place, in our arms for them, whatever the consequences. And I think that then lets the child go and experiment in life with the knowledge that there's someone there who really cares about them and isn't judging them on the basis of their existence. You sadly see many dads who, because they love sport and sport becomes a bonding agent with their children, the child then feels loved only because they're good at sport. That's maybe not what the father thinks, but that's what's coming out. Or education, either end of the spectrum, some parents who are very, very bright and high achievers, or parents who haven't really had the opportunity to achieve in life, then put too much emphasis on academic achievement or career achievement, and the child feels judged if they didn't reach the heights that the parents set for them. So it's complex, but it's that basis of love. And I know we've all had that experience, right? When you've had your first baby. I don't know about you. I didn't have any experience with babies at all prior to the birth of our first child. We were kind of first of our friendship group to have a child, or nearly first. I have no cousins or any sort of extended family in Australia. And I think, we've all had the experience where the baby arrives and you're holding your hands and you have this mix of love that you can't describe, that is so deep it is upsetting, that you're going to do something, that this precious, beautiful thing that is this gift that you would cut a limb off tomorrow for it to have a happier life, and you don't know what to do. You've got no idea. So I think we've all been there. It's incredibly scary. Yeah. But then I think once that if you let that love sit there and keep that, and then you go, okay, I'm committed to this, to use your term, intent. Then if you use love and intent and some sense of presence and patience, you'll get there. We'll all get there. It's not a secret sauce or a secret skill that only a few of us have, kind of thing.
Mm. It's interesting you're talking about M. Scott Peck's book from, it is quite a while ago now. I'm just trying to think back on it. It reminded me a lot of, Bill Rogers' work as well, and just seeing the good in others and having that sense of, unconditional positive regard, for other people. And just when you do that, I'm a school teacher and I notice that, in my better moments when I'm able to do that more frequently, that, you kind of, it almost feels like you're calling out those good qualities in the person that you're actually in front of and that you're with. And that by speaking to that kind of enables, the growth aspects of that person to start to, feel like there's a bit of light and a bit of potential. And that from that we can start to move forward.
Well, and your children and good teachers like you, what you're doing more than anything else is helping them build a degree of healthy self-esteem.
Yeah,
that they are valued human beings that deserve a happy life. That they matter, and they don't matter because of their achievements. They matter because of who they are. And if you can help your child have that sense of they're valued and they have both a right and a sense of presence to a good life, I think it's one of the greatest gifts you've given them. But that doesn't come just from it takes time and effort for that to build. I had this analogy, and I've mentioned the book, but where when your child is first born, there's this very thin thread between you and the child that exists, and it is very easy for that to snap. And for you to be untethered from your child. And the more time you spent in positive engagement, even talking about negative things but even that, just engaging, even on controversial topics or times of somewhat conflict, in terms of not liking each other's behaviors, but just building this relationship, you're layering this rope with more and more threads. And then when they get to adolescence and later teens, and there is a natural separation going on, which has to happen, there is this bond that's unbroken, that can't be broken, that each of you could pull on that rope at any time and the other would be there for you. But it doesn't happen on the snap of your fingers. It happens because you've invested time in winding bits of thread around that rope for years and years and years to build that strong bond.
Mm. Yeah, a bit like sort of the Ariadne's thread, isn't it? That sort of you can find your way out of the darkness of the labyrinth when you need to. And I love that. That tug is there, I know in climbing, that's a signal sometimes if someone's too far, you can tug the rope and there's someone at the other end. And when you can't see someone, just how powerful that is. You've obviously been working in this field, since the book came out, and we'll talk about the book in a moment. It's been nearly 25 years, if you can believe it, since the first. What I was interested in is, what has this focus on fathering actually taught you?
Well, let me say, it came about from a confluence of things. One was I had a terrible relationship with my dad. I don't think he was a bad person in any way, shape or form. I think he was from Europe after the war. He didn't want to be in Australia. He was sort of shipped here because he was a displaced person in Europe. His country had been taken over by the Russians, so he had nowhere to live. And in those days, you were shipped to Canada, US, Australia, Canada, US, Australia. So ended up here. Ended up in a job he didn't like, a life he didn't like. So, and he had mental health issues. So I don't in any way by saying it was a bad relationship, blame him in any way. I think he had a terrible life, but we just didn't have a relationship. There was no bond between us at all. And I always felt I'd missed out on something. I saw other kids. He never came to any football games. You know, I was always the 10-year-old standing on the street waiting to be picked up by somebody else every single week. Do all those sort of little things that, you know, I felt I'd missed out. And so part of it was this sense, I think I'm going to really try. And then when Grace arrived, at first, just saying, I'm going to do everything I can to be as good a father as I can be. Now, subsequently, I had 2 kids. So where am I now in that process? I feel deeply grateful in a way for 2 weird events. I feel grateful that I had a terrible relationship with my dad, which sounds odd. And as I think I mentioned in the book, my sister died when she was 35. This is sort of in 1992, so a long time ago. And she was the most beautiful human being, you know, generally was. Nice, loving, caring. I could give you 100 stories. Died in a car accident. Baby was very badly injured. And the gift I think she gave me was that life is very capricious, it's very unstable, it's very unsure, and you need to make the best of it. So the combination of those things, and then Grace arrived with this was, so I put effort into it, and the subsequent outcome, I think, is that, at least I think, I've got a very good relationship with my children. I test that by the fact that they will ring me for a chat. They're adult children, 32, 28, 24. So it's not just me ringing them, they'll ring me for a chat. And they will have really interesting chats about life in the universe and what's going on. So that's a gift I think I'm going to have now for the next 30 years of my life. So it's reinforced that the investment I was making made sense, had an outcome that I can now talk about, which I couldn't. At the time, it was a theory, an unproven thesis. Now it's got its data set in.
Yeah, and
it does matter.
You lived it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. And I think as parents, you know, for those of us who are lucky enough to be parents, you know, that those moments, you know, that you're talking about, the savoring of those moments, and, you know, imagining having, you know, adult children that are doing that would be really, yeah, very life affirming. You know, particularly on the back of the story that you were sharing, which would have been so quite, you know, tremendously confronting, you know, about the nature of life and the fragility of life that you experienced in the early 90s.
Yeah, and I think also when we talk about father, I think, you know, you can be an uncle who brings this love to your siblings' children. I mean, so I think obviously the biological father or the adopted father has a particular role, but there are other ways men who are close to children in families could have this sort of role of showing them unconditional love and giving them a sense that they matter. They matter, and they're good, and they will be good, and they deserve to be happy, etc.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Let's talk about your book, Father Time. As I said earlier, it's been out for a little while now. It's a fantastic read. You know, it was interesting. I was reflecting on it just before our conversation, Father Time, and I was thinking the 2 words are very operative in the nature of the book, actually, father and time, and a lot of the book is about time, which we'll get into. But the other thing I thought about, and I don't know how conscious you were of this, but Father Time is the image of Chronos or Saturn, and so I just quickly did a little Google. I know you're an IT guy, so did a little Google around Chronos, and it was interesting just to discover that, you know, god of harvesting as well, which I thought was an interesting mix. That image, I think many of us have the imprint of Father Time, you know, with the big clock and it's kind of aged with a beard and all of that. So I don't know how much of that was in the mix around the title.
Well, the Father Time, the sense of, you know, I mean, there was a mix of both father and time, as you say, but also this sense of there's a clock ticking. This is not some endless opportunity. You know, I'm 62 and I've just picked up the ukulele. I'm learning the ukulele, you know. Great. I'm not very good yet, but
maybe you can play the outro. How would that
be?
That's
right. But I could probably maybe wait till I'm 70 to learn that. Well, you don't get that opportunity as a dad, right? There is a particular period when you're a child, probably from 0 to 12, 13, 14, that are the really big years, and then you're done. There's still obviously more to do, but, you know, the big years are done. You don't get that again, and you can't recreate it. I've got friends of mine, good men, who really didn't pay much attention to their children until their children were young adults. So talking 16, 17, 18. Now they've got relationships, but they're not deep relationships. And now these guys who are now entering retirement have a desire to be more engaged with their children, and their kids are, I'm sort of paraphrasing, but saying, look, love you, Dad, but I don't need you. You know, I've functioned well. Let's chat 3 weeks from Wednesday. So it is this sense of you have one shot at this, and you need to apply yourself during that period while you're doing other things. It's busy. It's the busiest time of your life. Kids 0 to sort of 14, 15, busiest time of your life, but that's your only swing at that, a bat at that. And the fruits of that labor occur in both having hopefully developed a good human for society, goes into society as a good human being, that will replicate the goodness that they've received and the values they've received, and you get this sort of positive feedback loop.
So when the book came out 24 years ago, obviously there are some real similarities between, fathering then and now, but there's obviously been huge changes in the social structures, in our culture, and understanding firstly the value of the more sort of the internally focused domestic roles, but also how those domestic roles have really changed, and they're, much better distribution around the work and all those sorts of things. And that obviously impacts on how we think about fathering, because again, the kinds of fathers that you and I had were very different to the kinds of fathers that we need now. And the roles that we play as fathers are obviously significantly different, as they should be. What are some of your thoughts and observations around, what you've seen as a parenting expert in how it's changed over since the time you first wrote? When
I first wrote it, it was a relatively controversial book, surprisingly. Now, as I think it came out of the background research to a PhD. It was sort of a thing I pulled out of literary review. So it wasn't just me ranting away. I had some quite reasonable research behind many of the observations, but it was controversial to say that, the dads are important in the development of a child, and that you need to spend time with your child. It's not quality time, which I find an appalling concept. It's about quantity of presence time, quantity of time when you're present.
Yeah.
And about all the other things about bringing an open heart and not judging them, and all the things we've already talked about. Now, that was all quite controversial at the time, which I found surprising. Now, there, as you say, I think we've moved on. I think there's a lot more people talking about the importance of fathers and parenting. I think society is a lot more forgiving of dads who will go to pick up their kid in the afternoon and have to pretend he's off to the dentist or something. They can say, no, I'm going home to pick up my kid from school. That was never the case, so that's the case now. I think more dads are spending more time on domestic duties, which I think is important. It can't be left to the working mum to do that. That's just not fair. So I think that's all moving the right direction. I think we have demonstrably more engaged fathers now than we did 25 years ago. I think what has not changed enough has been the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
We still have created a workplace that rewards hours and not productivity, that doesn't understand that bringing up good humans is important to society, and so the time people take to be a good dad or a good mum is important. And we've really still ostracized against working women. Work is generally a structure built by men for men. Still pretty much.
It's still very industrialized still, isn't it?
Very industrialized, and women who take time out of their career to have the baby and are generally the best person to stay with the home with the baby for 6 months or a year or whatever. Their career does get impacted. They never catch up on the superannuation, or rarely do, their career development. So I think we as men, and particularly men as business leaders, can do a lot more to make the path for women easier. The easier we make it for women, the more we'll make it open for fathers who want to be flexible parents. There are examples of job sharing or examples where forward-thinking companies allow often working mums to work 3 or 4 days a week, but often they won't let the men do that. So I think there's a lot of work structure issues we need to get right. And I think, again, we can look at the Nordic countries for examples of where they understand the importance of a stable family and stable relationships. So we're heading in the right direction, but there are still issues. And I think, I think what brought it home, I won't mention the company, but it's a very, very well-known global investment bank. And the global CEO came out a few weeks ago and said, it is my intention to try to ensure that people below partner in our firm don't have to work from 9 p.m. Friday until 9 a.m. Sunday. So you think of all the aspects of that statement.
Yeah, it's amazing.
He's going to try for a whole bunch of people, but you still have to be, you have to be there 9 p.m. Friday, and you got expected to be there 9 a.m. Sunday, but I'm only going to try. And the fact that he wasn't sort of chased with pitchforks out of the room is surprising to me. A lot of my friends in professional services, so, oh yeah, that's, good on him. That's, trying. I thought, what the hell? What sort of world are we creating with that? That's seen as a good thing.
Well, you were saying in the book, your reference to study where there was 1 in 4 male managers that see the weekend as rest time.
Yes.
Let alone, family and connection time. Yeah, it's extraordinary.
And look, this is also, I think, one of the controversial aspects of that. If you're going to work a long week and a hard week and not spend much time with the children during the week, I don't think you can go and take 6 hours on a Saturday to go play golf. I think you have to do that. Either you make time for them during the week so that you've been engaged with them, they're not going to miss you as much, or you play golf when they're adults. I think the idea that you and I know men who do this and they're good men, but they're not paying attention. They're saying, well, I'm working really hard, fine. Weekends, well, I need to rest. I love golf. I'm disappearing at 7 a.m. I'll be back at 2. I just think that's appalling. I genuinely think that's appalling. I think you're not delivering on responsibilities as a parent.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I thought was great in the book as an active statement, I was a dad listening to this thinking, look, this is really, I agree, I'm thinking about this, or I'm going to have a child, or, I'm wanting to, I'm an uncle, and I'm wanting to be more involved. You actually give some fantastic tips, which I just want to just at the risk of quoting your own book, but at least maybe you can kind of comment and elaborate as we go through some of them.
Sure.
Which I thought were fantastic. So you're sort of talking about in the workplace advice, and you were saying, and I think these are really great. So you got one, which is identify family-friendly places, which we've sort of spoken about, but then you talked about some other things which I think are really useful. So the first one was finding a job with clear goals. Yes. And I guess that's about, Daniel, it's about, being, knowing that you're working in a place that has that doesn't have a lot of, a lot of sideshows.
That's right. Yeah. So, one of my mantras, which sounds odd when I say it, but I've always tried to think about how can I deliver what I need to deliver in any role I've got in the minimum number of hours. That's actually been my goal, to be super efficient, not clinical to the point of being rude, but not getting caught up in sideshows or letting activities occur at work that have zero value to the work environment, be they direct delivery or even relationship building. So being super clear on what are the goals you want me to meet. And the example I use in the book, I think, is with Bill Gates. When I went over and took over, I was the first non-American vice president of the company and the first non-American to run a product group. And I took over a very complex product group, which did all the email products, so Exchange and Outlook and all those things. And I don't think I was particularly good at it, by the way, but we did well as a division. So something
not as good as you were at the ukulele.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, but I think the in the end, what it was clear was that all Bill was concerned about was that we create good products and they sell well. He didn't expect us to work 12 hours a day every day. Now, there were in those days when you develop software and you shipped a code base, that was on a CD. If you had a bug in that, there was a lot of issues. Nowadays, you just download a patch over the internet. So in those days, you had, there was this intense period when you're coming to the last code drop to release a product. But I restructured our work habit of my group of 500 people around the core goals. And we tripled our revenue in a 2.5 year period, tripled our market share, and yet people were working demonstrably less hours because the goals were clear and there was no reward. I remember someone coming into my office and talking about, well, I was up at 3 a.m., blah, 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 blah. And I was like, well, why? Now, previously he'd been rewarded for that sort of statement. Oh, congrats, well done, Kevin, working so hard. Mine was like, wow, something's wrong. Either we've given you too much or you're not capable. And it completely flummoxed him. He was like, oh, hang on a second, this hasn't played out the way I wanted. And so people just started focusing on the core time. And I got, as I mentioned in the book, hundreds of letters from people spouses, male and female spouses of people working in my division, thanking me for giving them their spouse back. So it is that, you're being super crisp on the goals. What do I need to achieve in this role to be seen as a success?
And with that, you're talking about only going to meetings where the participants have the power to make changes. Lunch meetings? No lunch meetings.
Only go to meetings where a decision is going to be made. Lunch meetings, I never do lunch meetings, never have, never will, a complete waste of time.
Status meetings?
No status meetings. No, just status meetings can happen on an email. Emails should go, don't, with emails, just make sure you're responding to ones where you have to respond. Don't respond to everything. When you send an email out, only send it to people who either, if they're going to be updated, tell them it's an update. If it's an action, tell them it's an action. Don't start meetings before 9 in the morning or after 4 in the afternoon. Acknowledge that you might want your parents who are your workers to drop the kids at school or be home for dinner. So no meetings allowed before 9, no meetings allowed after 4, which allows for family time.
I think another great one was only going to functions or functions, actually, so outside of work meetings where there is a direct benefit.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not an advocate of you got to socialize and of course you do, but you don't have to go to the pub, every Friday night to necessarily bond with your team. Look, I think the part of the problem is this all starts with the behaviors of the CEO. That's why the most important thing you can do as a employee is pick a company whose behaviors, not so much values, but behaviors exhibit the sort of place you really want to work. And look really carefully at your boss and your boss's boss to see what are they like. And if there's a hint of them being kind of workaholic, obsessed, don't go there, because you'll never change them, and you'll never be able to structure your work in a way that will allow you to be a good parent. It just won't happen.
It's great advice. And on the theme of advice, I'm just really interested to pick your brain a little bit on technology. Obviously, clearly with your background, but is technology helping us to be better with our parenting?
It can, and it can also, like all things in my world, technology, they're double-edged swords. Social media can be super useful, allowing you to connect to people you haven't seen in a long time, but also can be terribly damaging for adolescents because of the images that they feel they've got to compete with. Right? So in the same way, technology can allow you to work from home and switch off at 3:30 when the kids come home from school and be there and chat to them and hang out, and then turn back on at 6:30 or 7:30 or 8:30, which is fantastic. So yes, there are aspects, but also terrible if you start to use iPads as child distraction devices in the car. It really distresses me now when maybe this shows my age, when we're driving somewhere or we go to a restaurant and you see all the young kids at a dinner table with their parents on devices, or in the back of the car just staring at an iPad in front of them. And to me, the car was always this great place you could chat. Yes, you play games and the I Spy games and all that sort of stuff, but you're just chatting. And clearly the dinner table, whether it's in a restaurant or at home, is the 45 minutes or an hour max you get to chat. So technology can be a terrible, terrible distraction device that I think undermines family relationships.
You're talking in the book, or you're actually talking earlier in our interview, rather, you're talking about how important it is for everyone really, but in particular for dads to be thoughtful and present. Can you tell us, do you have any routines or recommendations? I'm a dad listening, I'm like, okay, sounds great. What do I go for a walk the dog? Like, how do I become a bit more, how do I know if this reflection thing is really going to work? Is it just time? Is it downtime?
Well, so I think a couple of, and I talk about the couple of things I've done to do that. Firstly, before you leave your job, just sort of document, try and put on paper on your screen, in email, in notes, and somewhere, the issues you want to address tomorrow. So you can kind of clear your mind of that. And when you get home, just take a minute or two in the car to just reset and realize that you're now entering a new environment that doesn't really care about the day you've had, and you have spinning thoughts in your head is not going to help. If you need to get back to do something later in the night, so be it. But for that next period, settle yourself into this is a new activity you're going to do, and come in. You don't have to come in bounding with energy, but just come in with an open mind to be part of what's going on. Part of that also I find helpful is at the end of each week, I would take a few minutes on Friday afternoon to reflect on how I'm going in my life compared to my life goals across my work and, both in the work itself, in terms of financial, whether things are going that well that week or not, my relationships with my spouse, with my kids, my friends, and just see, wow, have I indexed too far or anything that week? Okay, gee, you said you were going to take the kids to school 2 days a week. You didn't. Be conscious of that. Don't let it just go slip into the ether. Go, okay, well, now I'm going to fix it next week. So this sort of summary, week summary. Go, okay, well, I could have done it a bit better. There's a reason that happened that week, but I'm going to try. And that helps as well.
You're kind of monitoring almost.
You're monitoring yourself and being present. I think the other thing I find really interesting with dads is that a lot of dads feel uncomfortable coming home to the witching hour of little kids at 6 o'clock at night, and they're tired and cranky, and that's understandable because they've come from a workplace which in all cases is highly structured, highly rational, full of adults.
No nappies.
Yeah, well, pretty much. And then they're coming home to a toddler whose nappy's full of poo, running around the house screaming because they didn't have their afternoon sleep, and it's just havoc. And I think the reality is that they are intellectually and physically capable to cope in that environment. They just bring the wrong prism to it, right? They bring the rational prism. They come in the door, hey, 2-year-old, you should just sit down and try and reflect on your behaviors. And you, 3-year-old, stop pulling poo out of the back of your nappy, and you should probably, it's not going to happen. So just get into it and drop your guard, drop any preconceptions, just enjoy it. Because it's, at one level, it is fun. It is it's all over the place, but it's, then when you've done the bathing and you've fed them and everyone's warm and snuggy and you've tucked into bed, it's kind of a lovely experience.
Yeah. And it goes so quick, as I say, like you said earlier, it's 12 years or 14 years at that first part, so precious.
And I think as life goes on, you need to structure things. People who say, well, gee, I'm going to spend more time with my kids. And I go, well, how are you going to do it? Well, I'm just going to try and do that. And my advice, I say in the book too, is diarise the sports carnivals, diarise the violin concerts, diarise the gala days, put them in your diary so that if you're going to override them with something, it's a conscious decision. It's not that, I forgot that the athletics day is tomorrow. Athletics day is coming up next Wednesday. These guys want to meet for a meeting. Wow, do I really want to not turn up? So if you can't turn up, fine, but it's a conscious decision. And the other one I think I got enormous value out of was taking the kids to school. Sounds ridiculous, and it wasn't a long drive, but it was and I tried to do it 3 or 4 days a week. I think I probably got there at least 3 most of the time. You're just chatting.
Yeah, it's incidental stuff, isn't it?
It's incidental stuff. And occasionally something will drop that they would never say to you face to face, but as they're looking out the window and you're looking down the road, they'll say something and it's a big deal. They'll mention something that happened at school, or they'll mention something they're worried about, and they just weren't able, because the kids aren't that able to communicate often. And you haven't created this sort of, tell me how was your day. You've just been sitting in the car and they say, I'm not really happy about blah. And then, what is it about blah? And then you can go down that path. So you do get these amazing opportunities to understand what's really going on in their heads.
We're talking with Daniel Petre, the author of Father Time. It's an Australian fatherhood classic, Making Time for Your Children. Daniel, there's 2 questions we love to ask everybody just to get your thoughts on as we round out our conversation today. The first one is, what is it to be a good man these days?
Look, I think often people talk about the role of the dad as being a provider, and I think that's true, but I would say it has more facets than the way it's generally interpreted. Generally, it's interpreted as you bring the money home that allows the house to function to some degree, and your wife does too, so you're co-contributors to the... But I think it is as important for you to be the provider of care and love and concern and wisdom and advice and listening. So you should provide way more. And a good man is someone who is thinking about providing for all aspects of the needs of their family, not just the material the material aspects. I think being a good man, you have to be able to say you're sorry. And men are very bad at that. To say, I made a mistake and I'm really sorry. And not in a fly-by-night way, but in a very, I am really sorry, I didn't mean to say that. I think that's super important for men in particular, because men don't communicate that well. So I would say a combination of those things is what someone who thinks about the impact of their behavior on others in a broad set of ways, not just financial provision, and is conscious of the impact of their behavior in the sense of saying sorry when they've done something wrong. And then, obviously the unconditional love. That's a good man.
Yeah. If you had a story that you could share with a 14-year-old boy and he'd listen, what would the story be?
I saw this question. I thought, wow, am I trying to phrase a story that a 14-year-old would listen to, or one that I wish they would listen to? So I was kind of caught. I think if it was, I hope they listen to it. It'd be about looking for idols. Who are they looking for as role models? Understanding that by the time they're 14, they are looking away from their father for other role models, and helping them think through who they aspire to be like and why. So trying to help them start to unpack the multiple layers of an individual, to not just aspire for a certain particular aspect of someone's behavior, would be what I hope that a 14-year-old would want to listen to. And if the one I'd like them to listen to, that probably wouldn't be, is this idea about, if you're a man and you have a role in life, and being a good man is about being emotional, is about being in touch with your emotions. It's okay to cry. It's okay to express your emotions. It is okay to be upset, but it's not okay to be violent ever. That's never, ever, ever, ever acceptable. So the whole macho thing we often see for teenage boys, that you want to unpack that as being highly inappropriate and destructive behavior that is like a cancer in your life.
And something that we very sadly still continue to see the terrible, devastating effects of, unfortunately, in our contemporary culture. Yeah, and it's just as a sidebar to this, one of the things that our family foundation helps fund is a set of domestic violence centres in Western Sydney. And my wife and my eldest daughter were out there the other day, just meeting with the CEO and the group, and just understanding how much more domestic abuse went on during COVID, when families were stuck together with the obviously the financial stress, and just how many more children and women were bashed during that period. It's just horrific. And the fact, sadly, that there was no extra funding from government to provide for services. So hundreds and thousands of women who called helplines who were being abused were unable to be even spoken to. It's horrific. And we've got to break that cycle. That comes, if we can help kids grow up to be good dads and understand the power they have and the influence they have, then maybe we can start to put a dent in that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that having that positive trajectory, as you're saying, in terms of helping men to be more thoughtful and present, aware, starting off, even in the early years, about knowing that it's okay to be wrong and connecting to their feelings around that, and finding safe ways for them to express that is also part of the solution. Daniel, thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom. You've shared, I think, an awful lot with us that we can now start to really use and apply, and also think more on. I know for me, I'm going to go back and dig up the old M. Scott Petre book. I think it might be on Mum's bookshelf somewhere now, but I'm looking forward to reconnecting that. So again, from all of us here at Understanding Boys, thank you so much for your work, for your generosity of spirit in sharing some of your own personal story as well today. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. This has been a great pleasure. I hope I've added some value to the conversation.
We hope you've enjoyed this Understanding Boys podcast. Make sure you subscribe on your podcast app, and please leave us a review to help grow the community. For more information about the podcast, please visit understandingboys.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.